Okay, so I am recording. Okay.
Great, perfect. Okay, so I had this idea of, as a tour guide, not being able to give tours out, like example, Caesarea that we're looking at now, the national park is closed, and it's more than 100 meters from my front door. And so I thought, what if we could do some virtual touring, especially in connection to Pesach? So the first thing, just is the first time that I'm trying this. So I did a run through, but if there are some technical glitches, just stay with me. And the second thing is depending on how we're doing with time, because this is also a shiur connected to Pesach, it's going to be kind of a mix back and forth. But there are a lot of really cool things in Caesarea that I would love to show you, time dependent, not connected to Pesach if we're already doing this. So if you take a look at the screen that you have in front of you, we're going to be doing this primarily through Google Maps. So this is Google Maps. Here, over here, you can see the theater, and you can see the stage very nicely. It's actually in use today. There are concerts in the modern time here as well, and they had a bunch of chairs here and all the lighting and electrical that they need. If you take a look back here, so this is Herod's Palace, and hopefully we'll get there a little later. But where we really want to focus on today is in this area right here. This is the area of the Hippodrome, and this is where they used to have chariot races, and then later on, it also became where they would have gladiator fights every 5 years. We have the Olympics every 4 years or every 2 years, winter, summer. So every 5 years in Caesarea, they would have some gladiator fight, kind of imagine the hype of the Olympics, from all over the Roman Empire, as well as special events. And we want to focus today on one of those special events. Now, the history of Caesarea is relatively, in the time of the Romans, it was a new city. There was a tower that was called Straton's Tower that existed there before, but Herod actually built the port. And if you take a look right over here, and we will, Bezrat Hashem, get closer, but over here is the port that Herod builds. The way that he does it is he ships in volcanic ash from Italy by boat. And when the volcanic ash mixes with the seawater, it actually hardened and made it a man-made port. Now, what Herod didn't know that we know is that the Golan Heights is actually made up of volcanic ash. And so he could have gone really almost to his backyard, being this is near Zichron Yaakov, Caesarea is right here on the beach. It's not too far to go to the Golan Heights to get volcanic ash, and he has it shipped in by boat from Italy. So he did not know that he had resources like this in his backyard. And he builds this up to be a port. What you can notice, and again, we will hopefully get a little bit closer, but if you take a look at the floor here, we actually have some of the original marble. Most of the seating that you're going to see here, the theater itself was rebuilt in the Byzantine time, so a couple hundred years after Herod. Herod started this project in 22 BCE, and he finishes it around the year 10-9 BCE, so it's a 12 to 13 year project. But right over here is a little hole, and you can't see it because we'd have to go around to the other side, but there's a hole where you can see some of the original theater. Now, as I said, I really want to be focusing on the Hippodrome. So what we're going to do is we are actually going to jump into the Hippodrome itself. Let's start with this one. Okay. So here we are in the Hippodrome. It is a very nice day in Caesarea. To be honest, this picture is not from today. It's from September 5th, 2015. But I want us to take a look. What do you see? You see stands. So these are where the people would sit, and it would really go all the way around. And then here you would have the waves and the sound, but there would also have been seats here. So it would have really gone all the way around.
No, he sent me a message yesterday, but I didn't tell you about it yesterday. Because he sent it when you were late at night.
Is this a question, or is somebody needs to mute their mic?
Tell Angel to call me tomorrow.
Okay. So if you see here in the middle, this would have been part of what would have created a center track where the horses would have run around. Now, if you can see over here, we have all sorts of little rooms that exist, and they exist all around here. And this is where they would keep not just the gladiators who would come out or the horses, but wild animals. And basically the idea was similar to our own media today, where you start off with, oh, this is very exciting. The horse races were nice. And then, oh, let's add a wild animal because people are getting, let's add people. Now, why are we here? Why are we in Caesarea? Why is the Hippodrome so important? Because although in September 2015 and even today, 4.5 years later, so it looks very picturesque. But this was actually the place where Rabbi Akiva was tortured to death. Now, Rabbi Akiva is a very significant figure in the Talmud, in the Gemara, in Jewish halacha, in Jewish literature. And so what I'd like to do now is kind of focus a little bit on Rabbi Akiva and his connection to Pesach. So we're going to come back to Caesarea and our virtual tour soon. But in the meantime, I'm going to switch over to the source sheet, if I can do that. 1 second. There we go. Okay. So what is our connection between Rabbi Akiva and Pesach? And that's really the first source that we're going to look at over here. This is from the Mishnah in Yadayim, and it's talking about Tuma and Tara and washing hands, etc. And so what does it say? The Song of Songs and Kohelet defile the hands. Right, so it says, we can see in the Hebrew, metamin et yadayim. They make the hands tummy.
Because he cut the stuff yesterday. Yes, because he cut the yard yesterday.
Them mute their mic.
Yeah, I'm trying to, or maybe Tamar, if you're there, if you can mute the mic. I'm not the host, so I can't mute the mic. And there's no name there, but whoever this person is, if you can mute your mic, that would be very helpful. Okay, so what does it mean when it says mitamim et hayadayim? So it's an interesting situation that occurred in the times of the Beit HaMikdash. What was happening is that the Kohanim had to be very careful that the food that they were eating wasn't tameh. But sometimes they would get food, people would bring a carbon or people would bring their meiser or whatever it was, and they wouldn't be eating it right then, so they had to find a place to put it. And it had to be a place that wouldn't come in contact with other things that would make the food tameh. So where did they think of the best place to put it? In the bookshelf or the cabinets where they would keep the scrolls of Tanakh. So they would put their food there. What's the problem is that mice would get into these cabinets, and not only would they eat the food, but they would eat the parchment that the scrolls of Tanakh were on. So come the halacha, come the rabbis at the time, and what did they say? Okay, in order to stop Kohanim from putting their food next to the scrolls and the scrolls being damaged, we're going to say that anything that belongs in the canon of Tanakh, any of what we have today as the 24 books of Tanakh, that is something that is going to make your hands tameh. Right? So in order that the food shouldn't be put there, because then the food would be tameh, any part of Krei Kodesh, anything that's written that is something of Kedusha, is going to be mitamin, is going to be something that makes a person tameh. So now we understand what that is a background. What is this first sentence telling us? The Song of Songs and Kohelet, meaning Shir Hashirim and Kohelet, mitamin et yadayim. So they are part of the canon. Rabbi Yehuda says Shir Hashirim defiles the hands, but there's a dispute about Kohelet. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying Shir Hashirim is definitely in Tanakh. We're not so sure about Kohelet. But Rabbi Yossi says Kohelet does not defile the hands, but there's a dispute about Shir Hashirim. So they're going back and forth of these two books, right? Because they're part of Ketuvim, and they're a little bit controversial, right? We know that Kohelet discusses ideas that maybe seem antithetical to our theology and our relationship with God. If it were not for the fact that it started with Kedusha and ended with Kedusha, you might have some real heretical problems with things that are going on in Kohelet. And Shir Hashirim is a love song, and it's very erotic, and it's not something that you would necessarily assume would be in our holy writings. And so this is the discussion that's going back and forth. Rabbi Shimon says the ruling about Kohelet is one of the leniencies of Beit Shammai and one of the stringencies of Beit Hillel. Rabbi Shimon ben Azai said, I have received a tradition from the 72 elders on the day when they appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, head of the academy, that Shir Hashirim and Kohelet both defile the hands. They're both inside of Tanakh. Now here comes Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, far be it. No man in Israel disputed that the Song of Songs, that it does not defile the hands. Meaning, of course, Shir Hashirim is part of Tanakh. How could you say otherwise? For the whole world is not as worthy as the day on which the Song of Songs was given to Israel. For all the writings are holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of holies. So all of the writings are Kodesh, but Shir Hashirim is Kodesh HaKodashim. It's the holy of holies. If you think about the Beit HaMikdash, it was the most holy place where God's spirit rested, and that is Shir Hashirim. So in order to understand what Rabbi Akiva was saying and how Rabbi Akiva could say this about a book like Shir HaShirim, which again is so different from what we would expect or what we see in all of the other Sfarim of Tanakh, let's understand a little bit about who Rabbi Akiva was. So if we have here, one thing that's important to note as we go through these sources, many of these sources are found in 1 or 2 or 3 places, and I picked one of them. So there are different gersot. If you've heard the story a little bit differently, it's possible that you've heard it from the other source, whether this is a midrashic source versus the midrash in the Gemara itself. So it's important to note that there are different versions. We didn't have unlimited amount of time, so I had to kind of pick and choose not only which stories I was going to put on the sheet, but also which versions of it. So what were Akiva's beginnings? It is said, up to the age of 40, he had not studied a thing. One time, while standing by the mouth of a well in Lydia, he inquired, who hollowed out the stone? And was told, Akiva, haven't you read that water wears away stone? It was water falling upon it constantly, day after day, right? So water erosion was happening, and that's how come there was a hole. At that, Rabbi Akiva asked himself, is my mind harder than this stone? So in the other girsah that we have, it says, my heart harder than this stone. I will go and study at least one section of Torah. He went directly to the schoolhouse, and he and his son began reading from a child's tablet. Rabbi Akiva took hold of one end of the tablet and his son the other end. The teacher wrote down Aleph and Bet for him, and he learned them. Aleph to Tav, and he learned them. The book of Vayikra, and he learned it. He went on studying until he learned the whole Torah. Then he went and sat before Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. My masters, he said, reveal the sense of the Mishnah to me. When they told him one halacha, he went off to reason with himself. This Aleph, he wondered, what is it written for? That Bet, what was it written for? This teaching, what was it uttered for? He kept coming back, kept inquiring of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua until he reduced his teachers to silence. So there are a lot of things that we have to unpack from this one source. Number one, Rabbi Akiva was 40 years old, right? So he had spent an entire life really denying, saying, I don't want to have anything to do with learning Torah. And when he sees this water and it makes this impression on him, well, if water can do something so hard, have an impact on something that's so hard, maybe really I've been telling myself that Torah can't have an impact on me, but maybe it can. Maybe it can have an impact on my mind. So the first thing that we see about Rabbi Akiva is even though he fundamentally believed for 40 years, it's not a short amount of time, especially considering the time period that we're talking about. 40 is not the same 40 that it is today. So at the age of 40, he says, you know what? I'm willing to try something new. So that's one thing that we already see about Rabbi Akiva. So what does he do? He goes and he learns with children. He doesn't just say to himself, okay, I need to learn Torah, and he opens up a book and he reads. He goes to the very beginning, despite the fact that you can imagine, I have a friend who decided that she wanted to study ballet, and so she went to a beginner's ballet class, and it was all of these like 11 and 12-year-olds and my 35-year-old friend. And she said, you know what, if I want to learn from the basics in the beginning, this is what I'm going to do. I said, there's not a single, she lives in New York. I'm like, there's not a single adult ballet class that you can take for beginners. She's like, no. Okay, but it's the same kind of idea. Rabbi Akiva goes, and he says it doesn't matter what the optics are. It doesn't matter that people might make fun of him. He's going to sit down with the children and learn things from the very beginning. And he very quickly progresses. But he has a very methodological approach to how he's learning Torah. He takes things stage by stage by stage. And then he goes to the masters. Again, he's not looking at himself as like, oh, I can't learn from anybody. And he's going to the people who know. And he's saying, teach me. And what does he do? The other thing that's very important in the story in terms of his method is that he thinks about every single letter and how every single part of the Mishnah or of the Torah can be significant for what his purposes are. These are lessons that are going to be significant for us as we try and understand what Rabbi Akiva was saying about Shir HaShirim and how he could be the one to say it. So let's take a look now at this source from Bereshit Rabbah. This should be a pretty familiar source to people. Rabbi Tanchuma says, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Menachem, in the name of Rav said. And Azai said, these are the generations of Adam, is a great principle of the Torah. Rabbi Akiva said, this is a great principle of the Torah. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, right? Thus, one should not say, since I am scorned, I should scorn my fellow as well. Since I have been cursed, I will curse my fellow as well. Rabbi Tanchuma said, if you act thus, realize who it is that you are willing to have humiliated, the one who made in the likeness of God. Rabbi Tanchuma says, if you do so, you should know that you are scorning in the likeness of God he created him. So what's Rabbi Akiva saying? Rabbi Akiva is saying, What's a principle of that is that when if you have an opportunity to embarrass somebody who embarrassed you, so you shouldn't do it. And Rabbi Tanchuma says you just have to be careful, because what you need to realize is that when someone embarrasses you, who else are they embarrassing? Hashem. Now we see in the next source, in this next story, Rabbi Akiva actually puts this principle to practice. And when he does it, he's able to counter what Rabbi Tanchuma said. So let's take a look at this next source. This next source is another example. We have a number of different ways the story is told in the Gemara, so I brought you one here. The Gemara further relates. Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd of Ben Kalba Savua, one of the wealthy residents of Jerusalem. The daughter of Ben Kalba Savua saw that he was humble and refined. She said to him, "If I betroth myself to you, will you go to the study hall to learn Torah?" He said to her, "Yes." She became betrothed to him privately and sent him off to study. Her father heard this and became angry. He removed her from his house and took a vow prohibiting her from benefiting from his property. Right? So Rachel realizes that Rabbi Akiva has very special qualities that are not something that you would find in everybody, and she's willing to take a risk on him, and her father is so angry that he basically disowns her. Rabbi Akiva went and sat for 12 years in the study hall. When he came back to his house, he brought 12,000 students with him, and as he approached, he heard an old man saying to his wife, "How long will you lead the life of a widow of a living man, living alone while your husband is in another place?" She said to him, "If he would listen to me, he would sit and study for another 12 years. When Rabbi Akiva heard this, he said, "I have permission to do this." He went back and sat for another 12 years in the study hall. When he came back, he brought 24,000 students with him. His wife heard and went towards him to greet him. Her neighbor said, "Borrow some clothes and wear them, as your current appeal is not appropriate to meet an important person." She said to them, "A righteous man understands the life of his beast." When she came to him, she fell on her face and kissed his feet. His attendants pushed her away, as they did not know who she was. And he says to them, "Leave her alone, as my Torah knowledge and yours is actually hers." Right? So Rachel, people didn't even realize who she was because of the way that she was dressed. And what does Rabbi Akiva right away say? All of my zchut of Torah learning and everything that you learned is really in her zchut. Now here's the part that connects to the source above. In the meantime, her father heard that a great man came to town, and he said, "I will go to him. Maybe he will nullify my vow, and I will be able to support my daughter." So obviously, over these 24 years, Kalba Savua regrets the vow that he had made, and so wow, somebody's coming to town. Maybe he'll be able to help me. He came to him to ask about nullifying his vow, and Rabbi Akiva said to him, Did you vow thinking that this Akiva would become a great man?" So obviously, Kalba Savua doesn't recognize that this is his son-in-law. He said to him, "If I had believed that he would know even one chapter or even one halacha, I would not have been so harsh." Right? So here, what does Rabbi Akiva do? He said to him, "I am he." Then Kalba Savua fell on his face and he kissed his feet and gave him half his money. Rabbi Akiva had an opportunity here to really embarrass Kalba Savua. He really had the opportunity to say, "Ha, you're actually coming to me, Akiva, and look at this," right? He had the opportunity to turn the tables, but what does he do? He follows his own prescript of Yehavterecha kamocha. Just because you were scorned or you were embarrassed doesn't mean you should embarrass another. And in the end, what ends up happening, he basically proves his theory to Rabbi Tarfon by the way that Ben Kalba Savua reacts, because Ben Kalba Savua is the big Kiddush Hashem when he falls on his face and he realizes there's no tension, there's no anchor, his vow is annulled, he gives the money to Akiva and his daughter. Rabbi Akiva wasn't necessarily assuming that this was going to happen, but he really is able to make a Kiddush Hashem. This is Torah. This is what it creates to a person, showing that if you don't stand up for your honor, sometimes you're actually able to make more of a Kiddush Hashem in his principle of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Source number 5. Rabbi Akiva said, Rav Huna said, that Rav said, that Rabbi Meir said, and so it was taught in a breitza in the name of Rabbi Akiva. One must always accustom oneself to say everything that God does, he does for the best. Right? So this is the principle. So far we've talked about what principles. We've said that Rabbi Akiva was willing to try something new, even though it wasn't what he thought. He was humble enough to go down to the lowest level in order to work himself up. He was very methodical about the way that he would approach learning, and he believed that every single piece of Torah had something that could be learned from it. Everything was significant. In addition, we see his V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and we saw that he put it into test by bringing about a greater Kiddush Hashem just by doing that action. So now we see one must always say everything that God does, he does for the best. And now here's a story. The Gemara relates, like this incident, when Rabbi Akiva was walking along the road and came to a certain city. He inquired about lodging, and they did not give him any. He said, everything that Hashem does, he does for the best. He went and slept in a field, and he had with him a rooster and a donkey and a candle. A gust of wind came and extinguished the candle. A cat came and ate the rooster, and a lion came and ate the donkey. He said, everything that God does, he does for the best. Right? So you can imagine, okay, the wind came out, but at least the lion didn't eat Rabbi Akiva, right? Everything that happens for the best. It turned out that night that Rabbi Akiva alone, who was not in the city and had no lit candle, noisy rooster, or donkey to give away his location, was saved. Oh, sorry, I skipped a line here. That night, an army came and took the entire city into captivity. It turned out that Rabbi Akiva alone, who was not in the city and had lit no candle, noisy rooster, or donkey to give away his location, was saved. Rabbi Akiva, he said to them, didn't I tell you everything that God does? Now, when Rabbi Akiva went to sleep in the field, was he assuming that he would see the resolution of all of these very challenging, you might even say bad series of events that happened to him? Was he assuming that he would be able to see the resolution right away? No. We're told in the story that the story actually happened like this. Is it here to illustrate? We don't actually know. But the point is that Rabbi Akiva held on to this, and this was the way that he lived, and that there were times when he was able to see the resolution of this principle that he held. The Gemara relates another incident involving those sages. On another occasion, they were ascending to Jerusalem. So here we have a group of the sages that are going up to Yerushalayim, including Rabbi Akiva, and the Beit HaMikdash has already been destroyed. When they arrive at Mount Scopus, which is Har Tzofim, and saw the temple, the site of the temple, they rent their garments in mourning, in keeping with the halachic practice. When they arrived at Har HaBayit, they saw a fox that emerged from the site of the Holy of Holies, right, from the Kodesh HaKodashim. Now, this is a very, very famous story, but we are going to look at it inside. They begin weeping, and Rabbi Akiva was laughing. They said to him, for what reason are you laughing? Rabbi Akiva said to them, for what reason are you weeping? They said to him, this is the place concerning which it is written, and non-cretes who approach shall die. And now foxes walk in it, and shall we not weep? Like, look at what has befallen our people. This is horrible. Rabbi Akiva said to them, that's why I'm laughing. As it is written, when God revealed to the future to the prophet Isaiah, and I will take me to the faithful witness to attest, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of, say that in English, but Jerebechia, I don't know. Now what is in the connection between Uriah and Zechariah? He clarifies the difficulty. Uriah prophesied during the first temple, and Zechariah prophesied during the second temple period. As he was among those who returned to Zion from Babel, rather the verse established that the fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah is dependent on the fulfillment of the prophecy of Uriah. In the prophecy of Uriah it is written, therefore, for your sake, Zion shall be plowed as a field, and Yerushalayim shall become rubble, and the Temple Mount as the high places of a forest, where foxes are found. There is a rabbinic tradition that this was prophesied by Uriah. Right, so what's Rabbi Akiva saying? Rabbi Akiva is saying, listen, there was this prophecy that took place that said that Yerushalayim is going to be destroyed, and there are going to be foxes where the Beit HaMikdash was. In the prophecy of Zechariah is written, there shall be there shall be yet elderly men and women sitting in the streets of Yerushalayim, and that's Zechariah Perek Chet. Until the prophecy of Uriah with regard to the destruction was fulfilled, I was afraid that the prophecy of Zechariah would not be fulfilled, as the two prophecies are linked. Now that the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, it is evident that the prophecy of Zechariah remains valid. The Gemara adds, the sages said to him, employing this formulation, Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you have comforted us. So I want to show you actually, if we're on a virtual tour anyway. So this is the old city, welcome. This is an area called Batei Machaseh. So you may have been here. If you go down this ramp over here, it leads you to Misgav Latach. Eventually you would get down to the Kotel. This area behind the arches is the area that you would come if you were coming from the Sephardi Center, or if you're coming from the parking lot. And here we have the Rothschild building, which today is a Zilberman Yeshiva. And you can see that when this Google Street image was taken, there were a lot of boys who are on recess, and they're very cute. And I bring a lot of groups to this area, and I always tell the groups, I'm like, I am not insulted, because I know that they are distracting. So I guess one benefit of doing this virtually is that they are less distracting. Here we actually, and you can't see it because this is where the picture was taken, but we have a column and the base of a column that were moved from Har Bayit. Now, why am I bringing you here? Because I'd really like to take you, let's see if we can get a good view of it. Back out a little bit, maybe. Okay, so you can see sort of over here that we have words that are written into the stone. I apologize that it's not so clear. I'm trying to see if I can get it a little bit clearer. But over here we have some words, right? So this is actually the pasuk from Zechariah Perek Chet, Od yishvu zakenim v'zakenot b'rechot Yerushalayim, v'ir yemalu yeladim v'yeladot b'rechovotea. Right? So the streets are going to be filled with children. And as I stand here, very often I have multi-generational groups and we stand by where this pasuk was written and you literally see the fulfillment of the bracha of these boys and girls and young and old coming to Yerushalayim. So Rabbi Akiva, in his eternal optimism, was able to really see that if the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed and we were able to see foxes on the Har Bayit, so then that means that Zechariah is also, one second, where's the source sheet? There it is, okay. Zechariah, his prophecy will also be something that happens and will be fulfilled. And here we today, living in 2020, are really able to see the continuation of that process, which I think is really beautiful and inspirational and helps us remember this idea of optimism and this idea that sometimes things are a process. And so Rabbi Akiva was not zocha to see it in his lifetime, but he wasn't wrong. Now, for those of you that are thinking, okay, you know what, Rabbi Akiva had this optimism and he just was able to look at the world as half full, we have to remember that Rabbi Akiva was also a realist. And Rabbi Akiva also approached the world as it was. It wasn't that he saw the world with rose-colored glasses. He looked to find the positive, but he wasn't looking where it wasn't. And so I think that's what's important about this next source number 7. 2 people are traveling along the way, and one of them has in his possession a flask of water. If both drink from it, they will both die. However, if only one of them drinks, he will be able to make it out of the desert. Ben Betura expounds, it is better that both should drink and die, that one should witness the death of his fellow. Then Rabbi Akiva came and taught, your brother shall live with you, from Vayikra. And so this is where we learn, Chayecha Kodmim, that your life come first before the life of your friend, right? So you might think that Rabbi Akiva, because of Yahavtarecha Kamocha, and because of the way that he was so optimistic, well, if they both drink a little bit, maybe they'll find water, maybe this. At the end of the day, we do see that Rabbi Akiva has a sense of realism, and Rabbi Akiva also has a sense of self. He's not a martyr in the sense that it's always me after other people. He has a life view that tries to look at the positive, but we still see situations where this as well. Okay, source number 8. We learn in our Mishnah that the explanation of the verse, and you shall love the Lord with your God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your might, right? So this is the whole right? So you should love your God with everything that you have. This is from Devar. This was elaborated upon when it was taught in a Breita. Rabbi Eliezer says, if it is stated with all of your soul, why does it state with all your might? Conversely, if it states with all your might, why does it say with all of your soul, right? It seems to be repetitious. Rather, this means that if one's body is dearer to him than his property, therefore it is stated with all your soul. One must give his soul in sanctification of God. And if one's money is dearer to him than his body, therefore it is stated with all your might, with all of your assets. Rabbi Akiva says, with all of your soul means even if God takes your soul. Now the Gemara is going to start to tell us about the end of Rabbi Akiva, at which point we're going to go back to Caesarea. So the sages taught one time at the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the evil empire of Rome decreed that Israel may not engage in the study of Torah. Pappos ben Yehuda came and found Rabbi Akiva, who was convening assemblies in public and engaging in Torah study. Pappos said to him, Akiva, are you not afraid of the empire? Rabbi Akiva answered him, I will relate a parable. To what can this be compared? It is like a fox walking along a riverbank when he sees a fish gathering and fleeing from place to place. The fox says to him, for what are you fleeing? They said to him, we're fleeing from the nests the people have cast upon us, right? So there are fishermen, and the fish are trying to escape the fishermen. He said to them, do you wish to come upon dry land, and we will reside together, just as my ancestors resided with your ancestors? The fish said to him, you are the only one of whom they say he is the cleverest of animals. You're not clever, you're a fool. If we're afraid in the water, our natural habitat, which gives us life, then in the habitat that causes our death, all the more so. The moral is, so too we Jews, now that we sit and engage in Torah study, about which it is written, for that is your life and the length of your days. We fear from the empire to this extent. If we proceed to sit idle from its study and its abandonment in the habitat that causes our death, all the more so will we fear the empire. The sages said not a few days passed until they seized Rabbi Akiva and incarcerated him in prison, and seized Paphos ben Yehuda and incarcerated him alongside him. Rabbi Akiva said to Paphos, who brought you here? Paphos replied, happy are you, Rabbi Akiva, for you were arrested on the charge of engaging in Torah study. Woe unto Paphos, who was seized on the charge of engaging in idle matters. So what's this story telling us? This story is very illuminating in terms of Rabbi Akiva's realization of the effect of Torah for the Jewish people. Despite the fact that he started at the age of 40, what does he very quickly, it seems like, come to realize is that anything that you're going to do, if you don't have the background or the habitat of Torah, it's more frightening, it's more scary. Why? Because when you learn Torah, what are you doing? You are relating to God. You're building your relationship with God. And so if God, everything that God does is for good, if I continue to build my relationship with him through my Torah study, then it's not gonna be as scary. It's not that it's not scary, but it's not gonna be as scary as if I didn't have a relationship with God. Because everything that Hashem does is for the good. And so now we're gonna go to the source. Again, this is another source that we have a couple of different ones, but the Gemara relates, when they took Rabbi Akiva out to be executed, it was the time for the recitation of Shema. And they were raking his flesh with iron combs, and he was reciting Shema, thereby accepting upon himself the yoke of heaven. His students said to him, our teacher, even now, as you have suffered, you recite Shema? And he said to them, all my days I have been troubled by the verse, with all your soul, meaning that if God takes your soul, right? So back to that opinion that he gave when it was totally theoretical, right? When they're just discussing in the Beit Midrash. I said to myself, when will this opportunity be afforded me to fulfill this verse? Now that it has been afforded me, shall I not fulfill it? He prolonged his uttering of the word one until his soul left his body as he uttered his final word, one. A voice descended from heaven and said, happy are you, Rabbi Akiva, that your soul left your body as you uttered one. The ministering angel said before the Holy One, blessed be he, this is Torah and this is its reward, right? Zo Torah v'zo hischara. And as it is stated, from the death by your hand, O Lord, from the death of the world. Your hand, God, kills and does not save. God said the end of the verse to the ministering angels, whose portion is in this life? And then as divine voices emerge, a back quote comes out and says, happy are you, Rabbi Akiva, as you are destined for life in the world to come, as your portion is already in eternal life. So first of all, let's go back here for a second, right? It gives a really new meaning to the area that we're in when you can imagine, and let's see if I can pull up a different view, 1 second. Yeah, so here we have it from the spectator seats, right? You can see some of them have been rebuilt, but these are seats from the times. These are seats from when it was built in the Roman period, and you can just imagine that this very serene place, as you're looking down, what the audience may have seen. And on the one hand, you have the bloodthirst and the corruption of what had become the gladiators and the torture and the thirst for blood and action and drama. And on the other hand, you can imagine the other people that are sitting here and being inspired by Rabbi Akiva's constant commitment to his relationship with Hashem. And his constant commitment that every single situation that he's in life, he's going to dig in the same way that he's going to dig between the Aleph and the Bet. He, who is a big rabbi, is not above learning from every person in every single situation that he's in. And if this situation, as horrific as it was, of being tortured in front of all of these people, right? If this situation was something that he was put in, then there was something that he could use it as in order to help him build his relationship with God. That was his outlook. He couldn't change the fact that he was here. There was nothing that he could do at this point. The only thing that he had control of was his ability to say, how am I going to use this to make myself have a stronger relationship with Hashem? Every time I put my mouse up here, I get like this share screen thing, so then I have to wait for it to go away before I can click on the source sheet. Okay. Let's skip down to the source. We're going to end now with the source of Rabbi Akiva, and if anybody wants to stay on a little bit longer, I'm happy. Sorry, with Rav Kook. But if anybody wants to stay on a little longer, I'm happy to take you on a little bit of a more tour so that you can see more of Caesarea. This is from the Seashore essay. So it was actually written when Rav Kook was having a discussion with someone at the beach. He was on a little bit of a vacation, and the man that he was talking to said, wait, this is amazing. You need to stop and you need to write it down. And he brought Rav Kook a pen, and this is a very small section of what is now known as the Seashore essay. A soul that is insensitive to feelings of romance cannot relate to the tender sensibilities expressed in the song of love. Such a person will pervert those poetic yearnings, reduce them to the level of his own base desires. Similarly, one who has never ascended the heights of holy contemplation, one who has never experienced the uplifting surge of the love for the rock of all words, meaning Hashem, such a person will fail to grasp how the sublime yearnings of Shir HaShirim truly reflect the highest aspirations of the Jewish people. But an insightful person will recognize the body of literature of this holy nation, whose long history is replete with extraordinary displays of self-sacrifice and martyrdom to sanctify God's name, would be incomplete without a suitable expression of their boundless love for God. As he was cruelly put to death at the hands of the Romans, Rabbi Akiva told his students, all my life I have been troubled by this verse, right? This is the source that we just read. You will love God with all of your soul, even if he takes your soul. When will I have the opportunity to fulfill this? Rabbi Akiva then recites the Shema, and his soul departed when he reached the word Echad, declaring God's unity. Only a soul as great as Rabbi Akiva could testify that the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies, and that the entire universe is unworthy of the day that the Song of Songs was given to Israel. In his life, Rabbi Akiva experienced love in all of its levels, the private love for Kava Savua's daughter in its natural purity, the idealistic love for his people, including the fight for the independence against the Roman occupation, and the lofty love for God in all of its noble beauty. Thus, Rabbi Akiva was eminently qualified to evaluate the true nature of love so poetically expressed in the Song of Songs. So with all of these sources that we go through, what do we see? We see that Rabbi Akiva was a man of love. He loved his wife, and he loved the Torah, and he loved the Jewish people, not just in terms of their fight against the Romans, but in the way that he saw V'yahatzarecha kamocha and his whole role of being somebody who was Mekadesh Shem Hashem through his positive actions. But those with narrow minds and coarse hearts cannot properly appreciate this precious book. They are like those who crawl at the bottom of a towering castle that stretches high into the clouds. They measure the height of this great edifice according to their limited eyesight. And if they are informed that from the spires of this great castle one may view a dazzling star, breathtaking in its exquisite beauty, they immediately conclude that such a star must be a lowly one indeed. Such narrow minds who can only see in Rabbi Akiva a lonely shepherd who fell in love with his employer's daughter will certainly fail to comprehend his startling declaration that the Song of Songs is sacred above all other books of the Bible. They only see a simple shepherd and a simple song of private love. We may appreciate Rabbi Akiva's greatness of soul from the following story. When a group of scholars saw a fox, right, this is the same story that we just read, scampering in the ruins where the holy temple once stood, they shed tears at this sight of bleak desolation. Rabbi Akiva, however, astounded his companions by laughing. He understood that just as the prophecies of destruction have come to pass, the prophecies of redemption will also be fulfilled. For this spiritual giant, the distant future was real and palpable as the present-day reality. His unshakable faith and vision was rooted in a profound love of God. This love filled his pure heart that the future was a certain reality, leaving no room to mourn over the disasters of the present. For Rabbi Akiva, the tragedies of the day were but a thin cloud casting fleeting shadows upon the brilliant daytime sun. Only such a lofty soul could confidently proclaim the entire Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies. Rabbi Akiva, who saw every opportunity in his life as a way to connect to God, would look at Shir HaShirim and say, of course, this is the ultimate description of how one should yearn for Hashem. And if you have time, I recommend you to take a look at source number 11 for the Rambam's Hilchot Tshuva, where he talks about love of God and the obsessive quality that exists. And when Rabbi Akiva reads this, all he thinks about is, this is what we should feel for Hashem. This is our relationship. And so it makes sense that between that ability of looking at everything for something deeper and using everything as a tool to connect with God, and his unfailing love, not just for the people in his own life and for the people of the Jewish people, but also for God, it makes sense with those two traits and his own humility that he's able to see Shir HaShirim for what it really is. Like I said, at this point, the shir is pretty much over, but I'm happy to show you just some cool things, especially of If we go over here, I'm pretty sure this is the right one. Nope, not this one. Hold on one second. I want to find you a really good view of Herod's palace because I think there's something. Yeah, here we go. Perfect. Okay. So like I said, feel free to log off at this point, but if you'd like to stay, I'm happy to show you a couple of things. If we're already in Caesarea, why not? So this is actually one of my favorite things to show people. So here we have Herod's palace, and you can see these columns were created to help us have a vision, but it would have been a 2-story rectangle that had a garden in the middle. So there would have been 1 story here, and then on top of these columns would have been another story around here. Now this was the pool. Now this was a freshwater pool. Today, because of earthquakes and structural damage, it actually sunk into the Mediterranean Sea, but this would have been higher up, and this area in here would have been freshwater. Now the reason that's so significant is because King Herod has a lot of water in his use that's salt water. And in order to bring in water for bathing, agriculture, and drinking, he actually has to build an aqueduct, which is further along down the beach. I'm sure many of you have seen it. And so when he's building his aqueduct, he actually takes into account that he's going to have water for pleasure as well. There's a bathhouse in the back near the Hippodrome where we just were, as well as his own private pool here. Now here's the part that I think is really cool. If you take a look, you can see some of these mosaics are left over. These are 2,000-year-old mosaics that we have from the time of King Herod. Now what you'll notice, and if I can get, yep, I can get about that close for you. What you'll notice is that these are geometric and floral patterned mosaics. Now, King Herod is an interesting character, right? On the one hand, he's the master builder. He's responsible for building, today what we have is the Kotel, right? That we give him credit for building, for refurbishing, I guess you would say, the complex of the Second Temple, including what we have today is the Kotel. Masada is a very famous area that he is known for, as well as, of course, Herodian, where he's buried, and Arta Machpelah, and the building that we have over there of the tomb of the patriarchs. And so we have a lot of building, and he was a master builder, and he was also very good at keeping the balance between Rome and the Jewish people. I like to give the example, imagine that you have 2 children, and the older child has an Xbox and goes away for the summer to summer camp for a couple weeks and says to the younger child, listen, while I'm gone, you can play with my Xbox. But when I get back, don't forget that this is really my Xbox. I'm not gonna fight with you. Like, just remember whose Xbox this is. So that's kind of the relationship that Rome had with the land of Israel. Herod was called a vassal king, so he was the younger brother in charge of the Xbox, but Rome said to him, don't forget whose Xbox this really is. After Herod dies, as we were learning about just now with Rabbi Akiva, so Rabbi Akiva was part of the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was, or he supported Bar Kokhba in the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was the second major revolt that we have against Rome. The first obviously being the Great Revolt, where the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed in the year 70. And so Herod, we see and we can appreciate the fact that he was able to balance between Rome and the Jewish people. And during his time, the revolts were not in that same space. He was really able to keep the peace, which his sons and grandchildren were not able to do. However, we also know that he was a megalomaniac. In fact, recent studies have told us that Herod might have had syphilis in his brain, which would have caused him to have certain symptoms of delusions and being really paranoid about things, which really fits the description. He killed one of his wives and took her face and put it in a jar of honey because she was pretty, and he didn't want to lose that aspect of her when she was dead. He killed some of his kids. He killed 400 rabbis. Like, he's done a lot of really, really horrible things. And there's a discussion about whether or not he's, even Jewish. His mother was a Nabatean who converted. His father, maybe she converted, we don't know. His father was a forcible convert from the Idumeans during the time of Alexander Yanai. So Herod in general is a complicated figure. Now, back to this mosaic over here. What does it have to do with this? All of the mosaics that we find of King Herod in the land of Israel, none of them have faces. None of them have any of the deities that we would normally see in Roman decorative interior design and architecture. We only see these floral designs. Why? because as much as Herod may have been a complicated figure, what's the second of the Aseret HaDibrot? Lo taseh lecha pesel. Don't make for yourself a graven image. And so Jews in our artwork, we don't have the imagery of people and faces and paganism, etc. That would be akin to Avodah Zarah, and we see that with Herod. And so as we take a look back at this pool and we can see some of his designs, what do we see? We see that they conform with halakha, which is interesting because there were a lot of things in Caesarea that did not conform with halakha, and there was a temple to gods, etc. But in his designing, in his own personal palace, we see that he did indeed conform to that halakha. The other thing I'd like to take you to, let's go one more step. Are there people? Yeah, there are people that are still here. Okay, hold on. Let me make this a little bigger to get there. Perfect. Okay, I'm pretty sure it's this one. Let's see. Yeah, perfect. So if you remember that I was talking about the port, so you'll see here, this is the sunken underground port that Herod built over here. And so what's really cool, and you can see that people are doing it around here, is that you can actually go scuba diving, and they found gold coins and all sorts of things from this port that collapsed. It's interesting, the rock that is here is called Karkor, and for some reason, the volcanic ash that they brought in from Italy didn't bind with it as well because it's a different type of rock. The sedimentary rock here is a little bit different than the type of rock in Italy. So while the ports in Italy, a lot of them still exist, Herod's port, also because of the earthquakes, but also because of the geological factors, the chemistry there, it fell in. And then you should actually be able to see already the aqueduct. Can you see the aqueduct from here? Yeah, so right there in the distance, let's see if we can get a good picture of that also, is the aqueduct, which is how Herod was able to bring water to Caesarea. Beach parking lot. Yeah, let's take a look at this one. Yep, here you go. So here you have the aqueduct, and you can see through it very, very nicely. They actually have 3 different aqueducts going on along the top here, A, B, and C, depending on the time and where they were bringing the water from. The water comes mostly from a place called Nachal Taninim, but you can get a really good view of it. If there are any questions or places that people would like to see more in depth, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, we will log off and wish everybody a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and obviously a Chag Bari. And I bless us all that we should really be able to feel the freedom and to be able to take on the approach of Rabbi Akiva, that even if this is a more challenging Pesach for us, that everything that God does is for the good, and whether it's in the short term or the long term, having that faith and that emunah that, that God, everything that God does is for the good. Okay, great. I'm glad that you love the tour. Depending on what goes on when we resume, if we still need to be not together, then we can do a different site maybe, and actually spend some time in the site learning some things connected to it as well. We can discuss that. Are there any questions? You can put them in the chat. You can unmute your mic. Okay, well, again, have a great Pesach, and it's been a pleasure learning with you these last few weeks.
Thank you, that was awesome.
My pleasure.